Good evening and welcome to the official opening of our new Southeast Asia War exhibit, That Others May Live, Search and Rescue. My name is Brett Stolley and I am one of the curators who helped create this very special exhibit. It is my honor to be your Master of Ceremonies for tonight's event. At this time, we would like you to please stand for the arrival of our official party and remain standing for the presentation of the colors and the singing of our national anthem by Senior Master Sergeant Kristen Foley.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
I invite you to pray with me. Almighty God, we come before you tonight with excitement in our hearts at the opening of this exhibit. We ask your blessing be with those who have made this exhibit possible, those that have constructed and restored it, and all of us gathered here to celebrate its opening. But yet, even at this joyous moment, we also know the cost to be in its presence, that's been borne out of suffering and loss, and because of that hardship and need, a group of people have stepped up with hard work, bravery, and dedication so others may live. So today we ask you to be with so many, those that we honor here today. May you continue to bring strength to them, and those that continue their mission to this day, be with them also. Those who have been rescued from their efforts, we give you thanks for them. And those that have lost their life in service of others and while being rescued, we ask you that you'd be with their families as they grieve the loss of a loved one and uplift them in their sorrow. Again, gracious God, I ask your blessing to be with us all gathered here, the world's greatest armed forces, our nation, and those deployed in its defense. I ask this all in your most holy name. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you to Chaplain Bayless, Senior Master Sergeant Foley, and to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Honor Guard. We are honored to have many distinguished guests in attendance this evening, both in person and virtually. Please know, as we recognize very few, We are most appreciative of the time and the effort each one of you has made to attend this historic event. At this time, we welcome our speakers for the evening. As a reminder, please hold your applause until all introductions have been made. Representing the Jolly Green Rescue Community, Brigadier General Dale Stovall, U.S. Air Force, retired. SAR historian and Raven FAC, Colonel Whitcomb, U.S. Air Force, retired. Edgar Allan Poe Literary Society, Raven FACS, Lieutenant Colonel Lou Hatch, U.S. Air Force, retired. Representing the A1 Sky Raider Association, Major Jim Bagerly, U.S. Air Force, retired. Representing the pararescue community, Chief Master Sergeant Wayne Fisk, U.S. Air Force, retired. Air Force Museum Foundation CEO, Dr. Rory Cartier. And finally, National Museum of the United States Air Force Research Curator, Mr. Brian Carnes. And now we would like to recognize our distinguished guests in the audience. Please hold your applause. Former Commander, U.S. Joint Forces Command, and NATO's Supreme Allied Commander for Transformation, General Lance Smith, U.S. Air Force, retired, and his guests, Mike and Nina Girardi. Former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Air Force for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, the Honorable Craig During, and his spouse, Teresa. Major General Larry Warren, U.S. Air Force, retired, and his spouse, Sue. Director of the National Museum of the United States Air Force, Mr. David Tillotson and his spouse, Wanda. Representing the Office of the Lieutenant Governor John Husted, Southwest Ohio Regional Liaison, Mr. Derek Chancellor and his guest, Miss Emery Bergdahl. Representative of Ohio's 38th House District, Mr. Willis Blackshear. Representative of Ohio's 73rd House District, Mr. Brian Lampton. Representative of Ohio's 85th House District, Mr. Tim Barhorst and his guest, Alex Barhorst. And the Mayor of Beaver Creek, Mr. Bob Stone and his spouse, Margaret. And of course, all of you who made it here tonight and those joining us virtually, we thank you. Finally, I would now like to ask those who are in the audience who were rescued to please stand. I would also now like to ask those who participated in a rescue operation to please stand as well. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this round of applause for these brave individuals, for their selfless dedication and heroism to this great nation. On behalf of the National Museum of the United States Air Force, we thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I would now like to welcome our first speaker for the evening, Dr. Rory Cartier, to the podium.
Good evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my utmost pleasure to welcome you all today, representing the Air Force Museum Foundation, and expressing our heartfelt gratitude to our donors from across the globe. This monumentous occasion fills me with great humility as we come together to celebrate the opening of this extraordinary new Southeast Asia Search and Rescue exhibit. This exhibit stands as a testament to the unwavering dedication and tireless efforts of countless individuals. It is through their remarkable work that we pay homage to the service and sacrifice of those who envisioned, created, improved, and completed the missions whose stories are brought to life within these halls. Moreover, it serves as a reminder of the ongoing commitment displayed by the brave men and women stationed in various corners of the world, continuing the legacy of those who came before them. I would like to extend a special thank you on behalf of the Foundation to the A1 Sky Raider Association. Their invaluable support and generous donations have made the A1H restoration and this exhibit possible. Your commitment to preserving the history and heritage of the United States Air Force is truly commendable, and we are sincerely grateful for all that you have done. As we stand here today, I am filled with the anticipation to witness the impact this exhibit will have on all ages. It is our hope that it will serve as a beacon of education and inspiration. enlightening young minds and stirring the hearts of the older generations who have witnessed the marvels of aviation firsthand. On this auspicious occasion, I extend my deepest gratitude to all of those who have made this exhibit a reality. Your support and dedication have brought us to this remarkable moment. Together, we forge a stronger bond with the past, the present, and the future of the United States Air Force. Thank you, and may this exhibit become a beacon of knowledge and inspiration for generations to come.
Thank you, Dr. Cartier. Now I would like to invite Mr. Brian Carnes to the podium.
Good evening. Just to warn you, I'm more of a writer, not a talker, so if I just read, forgive me on that. So as the research lead for the Search and Rescue exhibit, I'm honored that I was trusted with developing the content and the storyline of the rescue in Southeast Asia. Yet I was not just the only person who did that. I was just one piece to the greater puzzle. It was the museum's team of incredible restoration specialists, curators, conservators, exhibit specialists, backed by our leadership that brings exhibits like yours to fruition. However, like all things, there was a beginning. About 4 years ago, the A1 Skyraider Association approached museum leadership to discuss the renovation and restoration of an A1H Skyraider that we have now on display. Around the same time, the Edgar Allan Poe Literary Society, you guys all know them as Raven Forward Air Controllers, they just like the longer name, also met with leadership about placing a display in the gallery to honor their sacrifice and their service in the Secret War in Laos, to also include the heroic actions of their counterpart, the Hmong, who fought fearlessly alongside the U.S. forces in Laos up until after we left, up to 1975. But it didn't stop there. As ideas normally go, the project became bigger. Some call it a mission creep, we call it exhibit development. The scope was no longer about individual units, but about search and rescue as a whole, to include innovations such as heavy lift helicopters, rescue escort, airborne command and control, and helicopter aerial refueling, just to name a few. With financial support from the Air Force Museum Foundation, the A1 Skyraider Association, the Raven Facts, we, the National Museum of the United States Air Force, were not only able to make the requests of the individual units happen, but also develop an exhibit that encompasses the entirety of Air Force rescue in Southeast Asia. As you might already know, today's combat search and rescue mission is deeply rooted in the tactics, techniques, and procedures from the harsh experiences and lessons learned through the blood and sweat of your service and sacrifice. Brigadier General Thomas Dubois, a former commander of the Air Rescue Service, I think said it best when he said, "It has always been a source of wonder and pride that the most potent and destructive military force ever known should create a special service dedicated to saving life. Its concept is typically American. We hold human lives to be the most precious commodity." It was truly an honor and a privilege to be on this team, and I'm thankful to the entire rescue community, the Sky Raiders, the Ravens, and the Hmong for trusting me to capture their stories and for allowing the National Museum of the Air Force to be the keepers of their stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Now we would like to play a special video message from the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ramon Colon Lopez.
Teammates, it is with great honor that I address you here today via video, and my apologies for not being able to be there today in this great occasion of commemorating the actions and deeds of our rescue professionals from the Korean War leading to Southeast Asia. For me, it has been an honor to be groomed and mentored by many Vietnam veterans, specifically Wayne Fisk. It was him that actually passed on a lot of lessons learned in combat that shaped who I am today as a professional and as a warrior, as I carry on my duty with my generation during the global war on terror. And it's been consistent throughout our history. Since 1943, we have not wavered in our commitment to bring those home who deserve our help the most. And it is the crews, it is the maintainers, It is the actual pararescuemen and combat rescue officers that are employed and the SEER professionals that actually perform their mission of training our air crews to be able to survive. But at the end of the day, it is the team effort of that collective, honorable, and valorous team that is able to execute this mission that makes somebody's worst day their best day for their families when we bring them back. Congratulations, and I look forward to seeing the exhibit myself here pretty soon. Have a great day.
And now I would like to invite retired Colonel Darrell Whitcomb to the podium.
Good evening. Do you know how intimidating it is to stand up here amongst so many heroes, surrounded by the Wright Flyer, F-22, a Hanoi Raider, UAV armed to the teeth, and a Global Hawk? Does that say air power or what? It's great to be here with all my fellow veterans and all our visitors and everything. This is indeed a very special evening. First of all, we have a happy birthday to celebrate. 100th birthday of the National Museum of the United States Air Force, right here. They just celebrated that milestone this week, and it is interesting to note that the museum now has a display showing the history of the museum. History makes history, what can I say? And I do recall my first visit here now 57 years ago. I was a young snot-nosed cadet from Colorado. We were on our summer field trip, and we came here to this great base to learn about Air Force logistics and material, all that stuff that makes flyers be able to fly. And I couldn't help but enjoy that, meeting men who had flown back literally in the first generation of aviation, World War I, World War II, the displays and everything, and seeing the history being made. And I couldn't help but wonder myself if I would ever be part of something that would be memorialized here. And here we are. The wheel has turned. A super big thank you to the great folks here at the museum for this beautiful Southeast Asia gallery and its new exhibits honoring our rescue forces from the war and the Raven Forward Air Controllers who fought our secret war in Laos. Brett Stoll, Brian Carnes, Mitchell Dorston, all of you, your artistry, skill is just amazing. And as a veteran myself, I thank you for reaching out to us old guys for suggestions, artifacts, historical verification, and for allowing us to be part of this creation. So where are my fellow veterans out there? I see so many of you that I recognize. It's good to see you. I would like to particularly highlight one group that's with us tonight. We have a group of Hmong tribesmen here who have immigrated to our nation. I would ask them to please stand up. They were our valiant allies in the war in Laos. Please stand up. My Hmong. Notice the beautiful attire, the dresses, all that means something. That's all part of their heritage and their lore. And I think it's most apropos that we have them with us here today. I would like to ask the audience, how many of you hold a DFC? How many of you hold a Silver Star? How many Air Force Crosses do we have here tonight? That's real heroism there. That really means something. During the Vietnam War, as we call it, 3.4 million Americans served over there, most in South Vietnam. In country, there were about 300,000 airmen like us at our 8 main bases and many smaller bases. We also had another 300,000 airmen over in Thailand at our 7 bases over there. Air power, including all of our sister services certainly, is quintessentially a part of the American way of war. But unlike most of our countrymen who served and fought in Vietnam, we airmen flew across the breadth and depth of the theater. Thought we were going to have a map up there. Okay. So it's most appropriate and necessary that this portion of the museum should be labeled the Southeast Asia Gallery, reflecting our service there in that war. And nobody better understood the vastness of our operations across the 1.1 million miles of the theater than our great airmen of rescue. Why? Because they had to be prepared to go anywhere in that entire theater and did so when they were called. During this conflict, we conducted rescue operations as far north as 12 miles from the Chinese border at night, and as far south as Koh Tang Island off the southern coast of Cambodia. In fact, our last operation in that long war took place there in May 1975, and yes, our rescue bubbas were right in the middle of it. In that war, we recovered over 4,000 Allied personnel. Some of the individual rescues were just incredible, out-and-out battles, actually. And we have 3 speakers here with us this evening to expand on that. First of all, retired Brigadier General Dale Stovall, who is a legendary HH-53 aircraft commander. Chief Master Sergeant retired Wayne Fisk, one of our most intrepid pararescuemen, who I might add was at Mayaguez. I might also add, too, going back, that night when that guy was up there 12 miles from China, that was Dale Stovall and his crew. There's a hell of a story there for you. And then we have Jim Bregley, A-10 pilot with us, or wrong war, sorry, A-1 pilot, Sandy pilot, who, like most of them, flew to the sound of the guns. Jolly Green and Sandy were call signs for them. I might add personally, for most of us flying the tactical missions, those words were prayers. Every mission was a team sport, and they were prepared to have their best days when we were having our worst. The Airmen of Rescue were the highest decorated group of veterans in that war. Another group of airmen who saw the reality of that wider war were the Raven Forward Air Controllers and support personnel who served them, then covertly in our war in Laos. Much less is known of this part of the conflict, but our enemies were there, and in fact, some of the most intense fighting of the war occurred in places like the Plain of Jars, the Ho Chi Minh Trail in the south. Now those stories are portrayed and explained here in these displays. And we have with us today, too, my fellow Raven brother, Lou Hatch, who's much younger and better looking than I, to wax eloquently about Raven legends and exploits in that ugly corner of this war. But a warning to my fellow veterans, there's a trick here. There's a con. The great folks of the museum have an ulterior motive. They fancy themselves as the keepers of our stories. And this is their desired prize. And all around you now, we're looking at it, is the kindling to light the fires of our memories, and I do believe that it will work. I look at that OV-10 down there. My logbook shows that I had 3 sorties in that airplane. I don't exactly recall what I saw or did on those sorties, but it's probably there were plenty of calls from ground commanders under attack and in dire need of air support, maybe some jet wash from F-4s and A-7s, maybe some leaking oil from some of the A-1s, who knows. All of them delivering their ordnance and possibly ground fire twinkling up from the enemy below. In fact, we forward air controllers, we used to tease the A-1 guys because we told them if the North Vietnamese ever develop an oil-seeking missile, you're screwed. These are strong memories that harken me back to those salad days when we were awash in our youth and vigor. We truly were the beautiful young men of summer, and we proudly wore the cloth of our nation. I would like to echo the words of Lieutenant General Jim Slife, who was here just a few months ago to dedicate the A-1. He said, speaking to the museum, "I thank you men and women of the museum for capturing our history, our place along the long path of Air Force history, and for so sweetly keeping our stories." Well, my orders this evening were to be here, be quick, and be done. So I have said my piece, fellow vets. It's an honor and a privilege to have served with you in Southeast Asia. God bless you all. God bless America.
Thank you, Colonel Whitcomb. Now I would like to invite Retired Major Jim Bagerly to the podium.
If I were to stand over here, can you hear me? Yes, I can. Who can't? Okay, I'll move over here. Sorry, but the echo was driving me nuts, okay? Those earphones the VA gives you. Good evening to the survivors in the audience. Good evening to the fellow rescuemen. And you cannot mention the rescue personnel without mentioning the rescue support people. Those airplanes, those helicopters didn't get out there by themselves. They had to have fuel, they had to have the radios fixed, they had to have ammo, they had to have a control tower, they had to have airborne command and control, ground command and control. Every one of those links was critical in the combat search and rescue chain, every one of them. First off, a point of order. A lot of people, when they hear those letters and words together, A1, immediately they put an E behind it, A1E. That's an A1E. Hidden around the corner is an A1H. There were 832 A1s built by the Douglas Airplane Company. Of those aircraft, they were in two basic models. The model that you can see the easiest right there is the one with the wide canopy, so we called it the fat face. The fat face was the Navy had a couple models of it, the Air Force had a couple models of it. Some were used by the Vietnamese Air Force. The very first airplanes that the Air Force flew in Southeast Asia were fat faces. Later on, as the Navy started transitioning more to the A4 as a jet replacement, they started releasing the older AD4s, the AD5s, and the AD6s. I'm sorry, I'll scratch that. Say it again. The AD4s, the 8s, mostly. The single-seaters. Now, why did the Air Force start using that airplane in Southeast Asia? Take a look at it. 15 external stations. 15 external stations capable of carrying just about any conventional weapon that we had at the time. 4 internal 20-millimeter cannons. A little more punch than your basic 7.62 or your 30 calibers or even your 50 calibers. More punch there. The fact that it had a radial reciprocating engine. Easy on gas. Easier on gas than the jets were. You call for jets for some support, for close air support, for rescue, whatever. You get them, and they can give you, depending on where you were, they can give you about 15 minutes of their time. And now they're out of fuel, they're bingo. It's time to go get some more gas. The good news about the jets, of course, is that they were air refuelable. Most of them were air refuelable. They could go away for a while, usually remembering what they heard and saw, and go get some more gas and come back if they haven't used all their ammo up. The airplanes, the A1s that flew in Southeast Asia, again, they started out with the fat face, the two-seater, the generic A1E. The Vietnamese got them first, and they had U.S. advisors flying with them. And I put that advisors in quotation marks, okay? They had military advisors flying with them, doing some of the flying and the training and the teaching. They looked much like that paint job right there, gray. At the time, almost all of the Navy A1s that were slowly going to come to us were all white. And we didn't particularly care for a bright white airplane out there. Gray was bad enough. Then the camouflage that you'll see on the single-seater back there, the A1H, that camouflage pattern, the standard USAF jungle camouflage came into being, and that's what all the airplanes eventually went to. There were 244 A1s lost in combat in Southeast Asia. There were 122 Air Force personnel flying or on board the A1s lost in combat in Southeast Asia. There were 44 more Navy, because again, they had it first, slowly turning it over to the rest of us. I was over there kind of at the peak of the whole Southeast Asia War in terms of numbers of personnel and numbers of A1s. I was there in 1968 and 69. We had 4 squadrons of A1s. 3 of those squadrons were based in Thailand. 1 was still based over in South Vietnam. As the combat attritions continued, those squadrons shrunk down eventually to 1 squadron with 1 detachment operating location. And then in 1972, we ended our involvement there. Almost. The incident down Cambodia, of course, was in 1975, but it was still considered a bad area, a combat area, required combat response to kick the pirates out of there. Just a quick personal note. I was one of the people chosen, one of the first people chosen right out of pilot training to fly by the Air Force to fly the A1. The Air Force had diverted a couple of people in the pipeline earlier, so they'd had been some previous lieutenants flying it. But based on the 4 of us that were selected on the merit assignment system out of pilot training to come fly the A1, and based on how we did there, I'm very proud to say the Air Force continued to follow suit, and by the time Lance got there, what, it was 50% lieutenants, something like that. So it worked. We could fly them too, okay, even though we'd initially been trained in jets. One further item, and then I'll be quiet. This Serape that I have on here is exactly as old as the A1 Sky Raider Association. We formed in San Antonio officially in 1970. I showed up for the get-together and didn't realize, think way back, coat and tie required. I didn't have one. I was flying T-37s and there was no storage room. I went out on the street and I bought a coat. The hotel loaned me a tie. Hey, I thank you very much for your attention. I hope to see you here a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Major Bagerly. Now I'd like to invite retired Brigadier General Dale Stovall to the podium.
One of the fallouts from Vietnam is my hearing's gone. And I really wanted to hear what Darrell had to say, but I'm going to have to read his cliff notes. So we lost a lot of us lost a lot of hearing over there. But what I want to talk about is early on, and we're going to talk about the helicopters. When we go in the back, you'll see an HH-43 Husky back there that was configured to do combat rescue in Vietnam. Even though people were getting shot down earlier, we didn't have anything there. And Air America was doing the pickups with their H-34s that we had given to Air America so they could conduct their support to the Laotians. But then they end up flying combat missions. The first of the H-43s got there in 1964. But they didn't make any pickups until January of 1965. What was also there was the HU-16s, which were an amphibian. And before any Air Force helicopter picked up anybody, an HU-16 picked up people who had been shot down in the Gulf of Tonkin. And we used those as the Kingbird, the Airborne Command and Control, which was critically important. The first SARS they had a big bombing mission north of the DMZ when the first Pedros went in and picked up the first guys in North Vietnam. They picked up 2 in the daytime, and at night they used flares and picked up another one in North Vietnam. So that was their start. In 1965, July of 1965, the 2 first CH-3s came into the theater. These were cargo aircraft that they got from Systems Command, that they were using to test things. And they didn't have any armament. They had a fiberglass fuel tank in the back. So they were there, and then later on, a couple of months later, in October of 1965, we finally got the first HH-3s, which were configured for combat, with the air refueling, some armor plating, and all the other things that they needed. Now I'm going to stop right here and talk about these CH-3s, because it's a story that's not been told. These CH-3s, they only had 2 of them. They had them forward deployed to, I think it was Lima 36, and they were flying missions, and they had a fuel tank in the cargo compartment. They had no armor. The Jolly Green crews had no survival radios, no flares, no pin guns. They had nothing. One bird was you know how we have supply issue problems now? Well, you can imagine when these 2 got over there, they didn't have the parts. And so one of the CH-3s was the can bird. They took the parts off of it to fix the other one, and it was the flyer. So in this particular case, an F-105 pilot got shot down in North Vietnam. The Sandys went in there to find him. A Sandy got shot down. Meanwhile, back there, so they launched an H-53 the next morning, the flyable, and he got into the SAR area and it got hit, and the fuel tank inside caught on fire. And the 2 pilot they called bailout, and I have not heard of any other time it happened. They jettisoned the cockpit windows, climbed up in their seat, and dove out of the helicopter. The PJ, who was on the back ramp, got out immediately because he was getting burned. And the flight engineer jumped out the crew door with his gunner belt still attached. And he's underneath the helicopter spinning, and there's nobody in it, including him. And it's heading for a ridgeline. Finally, he pulls himself up enough to release the gunner's belt and gets about 3 swings in the parachute, and he's on the ground. Now, the other guys that bailed out, have no communications, no way of signaling anybody. So the next day, they sent another A-1s in there, and he got shot down. And that evening, though, a Navy S-3 came in, and the flight engineer used his Zippo lighter to signal the Navy S-3 that he was on the ground and he was picked up. The other survivors survived from 5 to 6 days before they had to give themselves in because they were dying of thirst or they were captured. But they could hear aircraft flying over, but they had no way to notify them. Anyway, back at NKP, these were the first 8 crews that were there for the H-3s, the original cadre of the Jolly Greens. And Baylor Haynes was their aircraft, was the commander. He was a World War II pilot. He was a helicopter pilot in Korea, and now he's running it. And he was the one, after Korea, you got to have high bird, low bird, Sandy escorts. Of course, she couldn't here. So Barry Camus called his engineer and said, "We're going to fly the Canbird." And the engineer said, "Not me, that's got 15 red X's, meaning you can't fly it, including an engine change." Barry says, goes into maintenance and said, "I need somebody to fly this aircraft and sign off these 15 red X's." Bill Warren said, "I've been in H-3 and flown a bit, I'll do it." So he signed off the 15 red X's pending parts. Most of the instruments on the instrument panel are gone. There are no radios, no navigation capability. Barry Camus gets in that airplane and flies into North Vietnam looking for the 2 A-1, the two Sandy pilots, the 4 Jolly Green pilots, and the original 105 pilot. Meanwhile, another Navy S-3 comes in, it gets shot down. And Barry, they had a second S-3, it picked up 2 of the 4 crew members, and Barry picked up the other 2 under fire on the second day. And he goes on the third, after the third day, the commander of 7th Air Force at that time said, no more rescue attempts after we lost all those guys. Here's the interesting thing. Because it was classified that we were in Thailand and we were flying these missions, no written reports were ever given on any of the missions that they flew. And he actually got a Silver Star because he picked up an F-4 pilot in the Magia Pass, and they put him in for the award. But anyway, that was the original cadre. They got the HH-3Es about a month after that shoot down, and that started the H-3s as the mission. So, but early on, you had Air America was the only thing. Then you got the Pedros. Well, the Pedros in July of July of '65. So he's up there flying in North Vietnam, and of course one of the things they had to do is put a 50-gallon fuel tank in the back so they had enough range to go up there and back, and they could pump it into the aircraft. Well, they get into the hover over this 105 driver, and they get hit and they go down. Now, when you see the Pedro back here, you will notice that the blades are made of wood, the rotor blades. And they don't do very good when they hit stuff. So this thing was mowing down the trees and breaking off all the blades. So it's sitting on the ground and the engine is screaming. So the pilot runs back to turn off the engine because he thought it would let people know where he was. Of course, they just shot him down. So he goes over to the 105 guy and grabs him and says, "Stick with me, I'll get you out of here." They went up the hill 100 yards, like we were told in survival school, which was wrong, and hid, and the North Vietnamese went up behind them and captured them. The PJ on board escaped into Laos. His last name is Bear. He was in a Laotian prisoner of war camp for over a year, and they were going to close it and kill him, they found out. And he and a guy named Peter Digler escaped. On the way out, they got into a Laotian village, and a guy came out with a machete and killed Bear. Peter Digler dove off a cliff, survived it, and he was walking into a clearing in Laos, and an army helicopter saw him and picked him up. But that was the story about the early on. Now here's the rest of the story. So, when you were repatriating all the POWs, you went by order of shoot down. So the oldest guy goes first, and so they're walking up the ramp in the 141, and the 105 pilot's in front, and the Pedro pilot's behind him, and he grabs him by the arm. He says, "See, I told you if we stick with me, I'll get you out of here." So the first H-53s got there in June of '67. They got their first pickup in October of '67. We lost, and the numbers are kind of squishy here, we lost about 50 helicopters and about 137 or 167 crew members during the Vietnam War. Now my heroes, here's what the helicopter guys, we were like Uber drivers. But we had a problem. We didn't have Waze. We needed somebody to find them. We needed a FAC. We needed a Raven. We needed an A1 to find them so we could go pick up our passenger. And then it was, unfortunately, a lot of times there's a really bad neighborhood. And we need somebody to protect us. And so we had the Sandys, we had the OV-10s, the O2s, the O1s facking in to suppress the ground fire. So the Jolly crew members, we owe our existence of lives and the success we had to our A1 pilots, to our OV-10s, O1s, O2s, and all those other folks. Now I got a couple of my local heroes in here. Ron Smith, and tomorrow we're going to brief Oyster 02 Bravo, Roger Locker, the longest successor evader of the war, and it was the deepest rescue in North Vietnam. Ron Smith went out there in his A1 and flew around in the Red River Valley by himself that first day, because we got that call that a guy named Oyster 01 Bravo said, "I went down on 10 May and I'm okay." And I'm thinking, this is a trap. This is a trap. Who in the hell can do that? Ron Smith said, "I'm going to go have a look." So I said, I was jolly low. I said, "Okay, we'll follow you up there." So when I get up there, he's out in the middle of Red River Valley. He's been there a little while. And all I can see is it's hazy at dry season. I see this black cloud layer all across there. It's 57 and 37 smoke from their artillery. They are shooting everything at him. And of course, he's out there by himself. Sandy 2 is back with us. And then they go down and I come up and look. And here comes an SA-2 missile. I can see it quite a long ways away. It's coming up the river towards Sandy 1, and all of a sudden it explodes. So what was happening, they knew he was there, but he was in the ground clutter, and these are radar-controlled missiles, and they lost him in the ground clutter. I don't know how many they fired at him, but one was enough for me. And then, of course, we had 2 MiG engagements. On the second MiG engagement, I get a call from Ron. He says, "I've been hit." So I get on the radio. I say, "Ron, where are you?" And he says, "Don't come and get me. Leave me." So we would never have had that mission and got Roger Locker out there without Ron Smith. Now my other hero here is the commander of the Jolly Greens, of the A1s. Stand up over here, sir. Okay. So let me tell you from a helicopter standpoint. Okay, so this was his third tour. He had 100 missions in North Vietnam in '01. He'd already got shot down once in a Army helicopter because he was stupid enough in getting one of those. And then he got shot down while we were there by a SA-7. And when he came down in the midst of the bunkers and everything, he killed 3 North Vietnamese soldiers. One with his pistols took their AK-47s and shot 2 more. Now, you're supposed to go home when that happens, okay? Because of the Geneva Conventions, now you're no longer a POW. He wouldn't let him send him home. He wanted to come back to NKP. We all knew that he was never going to survive. But he did, and thank God he did.
Thank you, Brigadier General Stovall. Now I'd like to invite retired Lieutenant Colonel Lou Hatch to the podium.
And good evening. On behalf of the Raven Facts, the Edgar Allan Poe Literary Society, we'd like to thank the museum, and particularly Brian Carnes and our own Ravens, Craig Daring, Darrell Whitcomb, and Gene Hamner for making the exhibit to the Ravens possible. They spent a lot of time this year, and we appreciate that. I think most of you who flew are probably aware of the Ravens by now and what we did. It was a classified program, so for the people who didn't actively fly at that time, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. We were a group of facts that volunteered for a classified mission that was to be carried out in civilian clothes in Laos. You had to have a minimum of 6 months in country as a combat fact and desired 500 hours of combat time. And you had to volunteer for a 6-month tour of duty, which meant virtually all of the Ravens would be extending their DERO state in Southeast Asia. That was a tough consideration for some people. Once we were selected for the program, you had to be boarded up through the chain. You get selected, it went over to the embassy, they would board it. The CIA did another background investigation back in the States. I heard from my family about that. And then you got assigned to the program. We would check our uniforms, records in at Udorn and over on the Air America side of the field. Check all that in, don civilian clothes, and then we would report to Vientiane, flying over on a C-47 or a C-46. The embassy would give you a few briefings, issue you an embassy ID card and a Laotian driver's license, and then they would send you to one of 5 military regions in Laos. And at that time, we were working directly for the State Department. Our operational command was the ambassador in Vientiane. We didn't work for the Air Force at that point. We were pretty much divorced. And it was a good thing because the regs would have inhibited our operation quite a bit. Once we got to Vientiane, you got a quickie checkout in the O1, your card's issued, and then you proceeded to whatever military region they were going to assign you at. And at any one time, we have anywhere from 22, a maximum number of Ravens in the whole country, to 12 towards the end of the war. So there weren't very many of us there, and we were spread out over 5 regions. Our most populous region, of course, was MR2 on the Plain de Jars, working with the Hmong tribe up there and General Vang Pao. But we were stationed at 3 other locations as well, usually, and worked with the Royal Lao Army and the Royal Lao Air Force. In both cases, we had Laotian nationals in our back seat. These were known as Robins in MR2 up north, and you've seen some of them tonight. Down south, we called them X-rays, and they were usually Laotian Army. We flew with them as interpreters in our back seat. We basically were facts. We did everything a FAC does, close air support, interdiction, inserting teams on the trail, you name it, we usually got tasked to do it. And yes, we even did some SAR work. That was usually a matter of location, location, location. The Ravens lived throughout Laos, so if you went down anywhere in Laos, there was usually a Raven and an Air America helicopter within about 20 to 30 minutes of your location. And so we got involved frequently, and we got involved early. A lot of times we could get to somebody on the ground before they could scramble the SAR force from in Thailand. The country itself became an issue for the Navy when, in the early 60s, they started flying unarmed recce missions up and down the trail. And they started putting pressure on DOD, saying they wanted some sort of STAR capability for these guys, because they were unarmed, alone, and scared shitless. And when they went down, there was no SAR capability at that time. It was prior to the H-3s and the H-53s, usually using H-43, sometimes staged out of the Lima 36. But usually the guys who were going to pick them up was Air America, and we were actually officially tasked with that in the 60s. There was message traffic. It was a joint top secret message generated DOS, DOD, Department of State, Department of Defense, both tasked the ambassador of Laos with providing SAR throughout Laos. And they were to provide SAR using primary resource of Air America. And those guys became our primary air asset for search and rescue. There's a couple of stories about Air America that are not true, that need to be dispelled. One is when somebody went down over there and they'd see these Air America helicopters converging on a crash site trying to get the guys out. And it looked like such a mad rush that people were saying, hey, they're getting a big bonus for picking these guys up. They did not. They got no bonus for SAR activity. In addition to that, there was a message set out in Air America that said refusal of a SAR mission was grounds for termination. And the reason that there was a mad rush to get in where the downed people were was because of tactics. The Air America pilots flew there all the time. They knew every location in Laos, they'd landed at it. And they knew where the guns were, where the troops were. They briefed every day with Ravens and with the CIA, so they knew daily where the enemy forces were. And when they made a judgment that somebody was down and they could get them, they went, get in fast, get the guys out, and get out of there. And they figured that was their best chance of survival in an H-34 of picking up survivors. And it worked. They did an extremely good job at it, and we owe them a real gratitude, a real vote of gratitude for what they did. Our other assets for search and rescue as Ravens, we had CIA officers, the Royal Lao Army, Royal Lao Air Force, DOD, of course, Air Force Air, Navy Air, Marine Air, on station all the time, and we could access any of this that was available whenever we had a SAR. One of the most integrated SAR missions I saw over there was in Military Region 4 on 6 December in 1972, and Air America C-123 captain by the name of Neil Hansen was shot down while doing a low-altitude drop mission over the Bolivans Plateau, just east of Pak Song. I had just taken off and was proceeding up towards Saravan when I got a call from Hillsborough saying there was a C-123 hit at Pak Song, so I started heading up that direction. By the time I got up there, an H-34 just lifting off of a medevac mission who had 18 wounded on board in the middle of the Bolivans Plateau in a reciprocating engine helicopter, went over and picked up 3 of the 4 crew members off the C-123. The 4th was picked up by another helicopter, returned to Pak Se. He was so heavy that coming out of the pickup, he dinged his tail rotor, had a tail rotor strike, and had to put it down at a little grass Japanese World War II strip that was just north of Pak Song. Put it on the ground. They had to transfer all 18 of the wounded, all 3 of the 123 crew members, and all 3 of the helicopter crew members onto another H-34. And when he went to come out, he tried to do a hover check, couldn't get airborne. He said he was going to have to do a running takeoff. He took off, said he could not go direct back to Paxay because he couldn't clear the lip on the edge of the plateau. We had to fly him up north and around and then back down to the south. It turned into a 3-hour SAR mission that involved the 123 and that crew, the 18 wounded, and 6 helicopter crew members by the time we were done. They force landed 2 helicopters. The last one ran out of gas. He was carrying such a high power setting, he couldn't make it all the way to Paxay. And on that mission, we had, overhead, we had 2 Ravens. We had a set of Rassisi T-28 fighters, Laotian fighter pilots. And we had, let's see, Hillsborough and then later King got us a set of F-4Es that had strafe left, and they got us a set of A-7Ds. And on top of that, I called Hillsborough and I said, can you coordinate some refueling for these guys? Because I know the F-4Es are going to need it. The A-7s may last a while, but we're going to need some gas. And they actually pulled, the only time I've heard of them doing it, they pulled the Cherry anchor tanker out of the anchor and sent him down, and he flew directly over our head at 20,000 feet. For 3 hours, we toured southern Laos with this guy overhead orbiting, and the fighters, whenever they needed, would bounce up and get gas and come back down and join us. At the end of the mission, we got 28 people off the ground in 3 separate SARs, 3 hours. I got a call for a tactical emergency right after that up on the Bolivins, and while I was up there, I realized that my fuel gauges were stuck, which was normal in an 01. We were used to that, so we used a wristwatch as your big fuel gauge, but I'd forgotten I'd been at low altitude and high power for a long time. So we normally flew 3.5 hours. At 2:45, I was getting worried about it and started heading back. I did a cruise climb and ran out of gas finally at about 6,000 feet, the highest I ever was over there, short of my field. Got it to the ground. It quit and restarted a couple of times, and I almost made the airfield, and I was on 119.1, which is the most important frequency in Laos. That's Air America Common. I had called Air America, told them what was happening, and they were going to come out and get me. And that was an unfortunate error on my part, because as I came in, I was trying to make the Air America parking ramp. I couldn't make the runway, and I had no power left. My backseater had been yelling, "We die now, we die now," all the way from 6,000 feet. And it was getting a little annoying, particularly because he was keying his microphone on Air America Common. So finally, I reached around and managed to unplug his headset from his jack box back there. But it didn't make any difference to me because the 01's awful quiet without an engine running. And we're coming down, and he's still yelling in my ear. And we get down. I was hoping to make the parking ramp, which I knew was big enough to put the 01 on. And unfortunately, one of the Air America guys that we had just picked up during that SAR went out and jumped in an H-34 and was coming after me, and he was coming rotor up as he came off the runway. He couldn't see us, and I had to go around him, and I could no longer make the parking ramp. So I managed to put it down in a Jeep parking lot in the front side of the Air America building and landed. My backseater got out, literally kissed the ground, walked across the ramp, and never flew with me again. I was a little upset about that. I thought that was kind of cheap, but then one of our CIA guys, Kam Singh, told me, he said, "Lou, you know you're the 3rd Raven he's been shot down with, right?" I said, "No, I didn't. Maybe I owe him an apology." But that was probably the most diverse SAR that I saw. Not necessarily the most exciting, but definitely the most diverse. I mentioned that there are probably 2 reasons that it's appropriate that we be considered as part of the search and rescue exhibit. And the second reason is that we were frequent users of the service. We were frequent flyers, whatever you want to call it, repeat customers. I frequently, matter of fact, the most common question I get as president of the Ravens is, what was your shoot down rate? We don't know. We've never tried to get that. You have to understand, when we came into country, one of the things they slapped you around with during your initial in-briefing was, don't keep a diary, don't write about it going home, and don't even take notes in your logbook. and I didn't. Some guys did. We now call them authors. But in my case, for me to put a mission together, I have to go to a lot of other sources to document it. Usually the Air America aircraft records, they maintained our airplanes, so they have our tail numbers and that kind of stuff. And there are some sources out there, but it's sometimes difficult to put together the story. And it's definitely difficult to try to determine any kind of shoot rate. It varied by what military region you were in and when. What time of the year, what was the monsoon season, what were the North Vietnamese strategies in particular. They drove the war for us. And so it became difficult. Now, best I can do, the only thing that we know for sure that we had documented was anybody who was killed or missing in action is documented. And we had 22 of those out of 192 Ravens who were assigned during the course of the war, about 11.4%, which doesn't sound that bad, but it's not our shoot down rate. That's our kill rate. For shoot down, the best I can do is just give you a rundown of what happened in my AO during a 6-month tour of duty. I got there in August of '72. The war ended on February 22nd for the Ravens of '73. It was 6 months almost exactly. And during that time, we had Paksay MR4 was a 4-position base. We had 4 Raven positions there. And during that 6-month tour of duty, we had 9 guys cycle through those 4 positions. 5 of us were shot down. That's 55%. We also had 2 others that force landed either due to fuel starvation or mechanical problems. So around 77% went down during combat missions during a 6-month tour of duty. And the way our year rolled out there, I got there in August, the last of August. September, Raven 40, Jim Yeager, was shot down. Force landed his airplane outside the Click 21 east of Paksay, was picked up by the Royal Lao Army. He rode back to Paksay in the back of a pickup truck that was pulling his airplane back to Paksay. He made it all the way back that way. On October, a month later, the new Raven 40, Mike Stearns, got shot down while doing a 1,000-man infill up on the Bolivans Plateau. Put it down in a field that had tree stumps that he couldn't see in it. It was an elephant grass. And wound up in the hospital in New Dorn for 6 months getting skin grafts. In November, on the 6th of November, we had one of our Laotian T-28 fighter pilots down there was shot down and killed. Many of you know him or know of him. He flew as both a Chapakawa and as a RASA T-28 pilot. We selected him as a Nakatan FAC, where he maintained a dual qualification. He'd fly several days a week as a T-28 flight lead, and then he'd go fly in 01 as a forward air controller with the Laotians. And he was flying as Nakatan Sisun Song that day, 402. And he was shot down at the mountain overlooking Kongsidong and was killed along with one of our best backseaters, Sergeant Ponti. In December, on the 6th of December, was that mission I talked about with Neil Hansen, the Air America 123 pilot. On the 21st of December, Spectre 16 went down. Some of you may have been involved in that. That became a night LNRS mission. We were actually overhead. 4 Ravens were overhead in 201s that night before the second 130 got on station. And it was a bomber's moon. We could have done it probably in 45 minutes. I had Air America spinning up, and we showed up, got out there. We located both parachutes and had started communicating with the 2 survivors when the other AC-130 came out and took over on scene. We were told that we were waved off the mission. We experienced a bit of a radio failure and stayed in the area hoping our H-34s were going to get out there, but I got called later and they said, no, your H-34s have been grounded, they're not taking off. So we returned to Paksay, but the next morning they wanted us up at first light to do a VR of the crash site, tell us what it looked like, and then by about 9 or 10 that morning we had to put in a Laotian company to try to secure the site, classified information and remains. We did that, but they came under attack going in on the first wave. The enemy had ringed the crash site. It was in a clearing, and they had ringed it and platoon leader and one of the other guys on board was killed immediately on the landing. The rest got in, but now we had less than a platoon on the ground, and there was no way they could survive. We had to put the rest of them into the secondary LZ, so we spent the day with several Ravens and several Ocean T-28 flights, keeping these guys from getting overrun, and then escorting them down the road till we got them out of there. That was on the 22nd. On the 23rd, Raven 40, Hal Mishler, was shot down at Saravan, along with another one of our excellent backseaters, Sergeant Kaman. They were both killed, turns out, but by the time we got up there, we got shot down. There were two other Ravens, Raven 40, or Raven 42, and Raven 44 were both shot down. So in one day there, we lost 100% of the Ravens stationed at Paksay were shot down. Within a 24-hour period, on the 24th, Skip Jackson was shot down in the PDJ, and that made it an even 4 for a 24-hour period, which was 1/3 of the 12 Ravens who were in country at the time. That's the best I can give you as far as shoot down rates for the Raven and what our tour of duty was like. We all flew a lot. I was probably a low time flyover there. I flew 180 hours a month. Jay Johnson was at my location. He was also flying 180. We compared our logbooks earlier this year for a briefing we did. But you will find sitting in this audience several of these guys in black shirts that flew 200, 220, 230 hours in a month. I'd like to say that the reason that we didn't fly that much is I didn't have the airframes. I only had 4 01s. I had 4 Ravens, and I had 4 Nakatans that had to use those airplanes. And I spread the time around, so we were only getting about 180 a month. It was an exciting program. We enjoyed it. Every year, on the 23rd of December, Jack Shaw and I call each other, no matter where we are in the world. We've done this since about 73 or 74 when we got back. Jack Shaw and I were the 2 survivors of the 23rd, 24th of December. And we call each other up, and first thing we do is toast with Johnny Walker Black. There's a long story behind that, but we toast with Johnny Walker Black, Hal Mishler, our friend that was killed there at the site. Along with his backseater, Kaman, we toast Shedhat Panti and Skip Jackson. And after that, we spend about 10 or 15 minutes going over our lives for the previous year. And at the end of that, we sign off with another toast. And I'd like to offer that toast to everyone in this audience that is here. And it's dedicated to the men who flew extraordinarily dangerous missions and who risked their lives on a daily basis that others may live. Our toast simply goes, we're still here. Thank you.
You know, when I talk about Jim Harding, Jim, stand up again, please. Hobo 1, Sandy 1. It's hard for me not to get choked up. But just to describe what kind of a warrior he is. Air Force Cross, 3 Silver Stars, 14 DFCs. You have 40 air medals? 40 air medals, 4 Purple Hearts, shot down twice.
Thank you very much, Colonel Hatch. Now I would like to invite retired Chief Master Sergeant Wayne Fisk to the podium.
When we went to war in Southeast Asia, our futures in CSAR were unknown. When we departed, our experiences had been defined, but largely they were untold. We executed our missions from both ends of the tactical spectrum, and that was unique. Sometimes it was as an amicable force going in and coming out without a shot being fired, because not every mission was a gunfight. Other times it was an appalling force of overpowering might to assure that we would fulfill our promise. These things we do that others may live, no matter what the opposition was. And because of that commitment, that declaration to our fellow forces, either ground or air, that they would be found, or if they found themselves in deep weeds, we would be there to extract them, no matter what the problem. We would not leave them there. And now, some of the stories of the warriors who were in need at that time, of the men of Caesar, it will be told. And thousands of people will learn about the quick snatch and grabs or the lengthy multi-day missions such as Boxer 2-2, Bat 2-1, or Oyster 0-1. And I have no doubt that someday, possibly soon, now that this day has come and this exhibit is open, that an aging man, and perhaps one who is in this exhibit, will bring his grandchild to this spot, and that the child, after seeing and reading, hearing about this exhibit, will look up and say, "Grandfather, were you a hero like these men?" And the old man's eyes will assume a faraway look, and they will mist over, and his mind will flood with memories and travel back to a time of emergency beepers locked on channel 243, broadcasting the distress calls of downed airmen and Marines and soldiers in enemy clutches. In his mind's eye, he will once again see missiles and rockets flashing past his aircraft so close they could reach out and touch them. He will feel his frail aircraft being flung about by explosive detonations of enemy aircraft artillery. And in this, he will relive the anxieties and fears of bullets and shrapnels penetrating his aircraft. And he will smell the explosive fumes of ruptured aviation fuel lines and of burning electrical circuits. But foremost in his mind, he will remember the desperate radio calls of men under fire who are in a worse predicament than him. And he will know once again that there is absolutely no other place on earth that he would rather be than right here, right now, at this very moment. He will reawaken in his mind the ferocity of battles in a very small and confined space, of men reaching out to him with pleas and expectations of rescue in their lips and in their eyes. He will recapture the memories of emerging hope as desperate and injured men board the helicopter, and how that hope blossoms into elation, and finally how elation bursts into triumph as they fly battered and bleeding out of that God-forsaken hole of hell. And when it's all over, when the ones he has been sent to rescue are safe home, he will remember with heartbreaking sadness the brothers of other times and other places who did not make it back. He will wipe his eyes, now moist, clear his tightened throat, and whisper proudly to that admiring child at his side, looking at the exhibits that we now have here, and that child looking at in wonderment, and he will answer in modesty, "No, I don't think I was a hero, but I walked in the footsteps of men who were, and they are here in this exhibit." Thus we went to war. We had defining experiences, and they are here to be seen and told. What would be more difficult is to speak for those who went with us, that others may live, but they didn't live. And it will be for us to tell their warrior stories as they superbly define King James Version of John 15:13. "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. They are forever young, forever our brothers. Thank you, everyone who has been a part of this exhibit and for making this day a reality. It makes us live. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for honoring this day. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you, Chief Fisk. As we conclude this evening's event, our audience is free to tour the exhibit until 8:30 tonight and enjoy some refreshments in the Southeast Asia War Gallery. The exhibit team will be here, standing by to answer any of your questions, and we invite our virtual audience to visit the museum's website for additional information on the exhibit, and we look forward to seeing you here in person in the near future. We would also like to invite all of you to return tomorrow, June 3rd, and join us in the Carney Auditorium to hear some of the amazing stories from those who were on the ground and in the air in Southeast Asia, and those who contributed to making this exhibit possible. There is a program for tomorrow's presentations located at the back of the room. The program is also listed on our website for those who would like to join us virtually. Now, for a special performance that some of you may remember from 23 years ago, please welcome our special guest.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! I need to be saved. Rescue me. Take me in your arms. Rescue me. I want your tender charms 'cause I'm lonely and I'm blue. I need you and your love too. Come on and rescue me. Come on, baby, and rescue me. Come on, baby, and rescue me. 'Cause I need you by my side. Can't you see that I'm lonely? Rescue me. Come on and take my heart, take your love, and conquer every part. 'Cause I'm lonely and I'm blue. I need you and your love too. Come on and rescue me. Come on, baby, and rescue me. Come on, baby, and rescue me. 'Cause I need you by my side. Can't you see that I'm lonely? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Felita LaRock. 23 years ago, I did the same song for our pararescuers and the special guest up here tonight. Chief, rescue me. Take me in your arms. Rescue me. I want your tender touch 'cause I'm lonely and I'm blue. I need you and your love too. Come on and rescue me. Come on, baby. Take me, baby. Hold me, baby. Let me, baby. Can't you see? Can't you see? Can't you see that I'm lonely? Come on and take my head. Come on, Chief. And be my man, 'cause I want you and I love you. I need you. Can't you see that I'm lonely? Take me, baby. Love me, baby. Be baby. Can't you see that I'm lonely? Rescue me. All right, thank you, Chief. Rescue me for saving my life, for saving our lives. Rescue me. Can't you see that I'm lonely? Rescue me. Yours to keep, sir. Thank you all so very kindly. God bless you all. Good night.
Thank you so much, Tech Sergeant Retired Felita LaRock of the Air Force Band of Flight. What a wonderful and amazing performance. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our official ceremony for this evening. We now invite you to make your way to your National Museum of the United States Air Force's newest exhibit, That Others May Live, Search and Rescue. Thank you and have a great Air Force evening.